This remastered interview includes bonus content of additional questions and answers originally made available only to members of Cristina's Patreon Members Club.
So I wanted to get started by asking you, between 1995 and 2004, before you saw the Tic-Tac object while serving on the Princeton, did you ever hear accounts from others in the service regarding UFOs, or were the events of that night your first exposure to the phenomenon?
The closest I had come to that point to hearing anything official, not just a story about something someone may have seen in their lifetime, something that was that made more sense, or made sense to what I thought was the zeitgeist at the time, was a friend who was he was security police in a portion of what everybody else calls Area 51. And I thought that was really neat and interesting. And that was before the satellite photos had been declassified of Area 51, and we all knew that it was a real place. Beyond that, just other people's anecdotal sightings, but nothing official whatsoever.
So Dixon has a question. He says, has Sean seen Biden's first UAP response?
I haven't. I actually, a friend of mine texted me the video clip of it, and I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, no.
When what you saw witnessed on the bridge wing in the sky that night must have really shocked you as things were happening. Can you recall what was going through your mind as you were watching these objects do their movements and then disappear?
It was... I often tell the story, and my wife commented the other day, she goes, you tell it the same every time. It was 5 to 7 lights off the port bow, about 45 degrees up, and I think about 2,000 feet in elevation, moving towards the center together, and then each of them blinking out. And at the time, I didn't know what the heck I was looking at. I mean, I had gathered a little bit by that point. We hadn't had any open discussions that we were chasing a UFO per se, but it had been kind of thrown around that that's what these were. We didn't know what they were, and they were flying around, etc. So during the time this was happening, there were already rumors being thrown around of what it could be. Is that what you're saying? Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, Kevin and I'd asked him a couple of times, Senior Chief Kevin Day, what are we doing here? And I mean, I knew that we were looking for something that we couldn't identify. And at first we were trying to determine whether or not they were real, or whether they were ghosts in the radar, so to speak. But then later on, when it was obvious if we were going to sortie jets after them, they were real. So then seeing that in the sky, it just didn't compute. If you know what I mean. There's nothing that should have moved and acted like that where we were whatsoever.
Another super chat, and it says, how likely is that military has already attempted or will attempt efforts to communicate with the phenomenon? What would that look like?
I couldn't hazard a guess as to the military doing it. I don't think that it's their job to open up diplomatic communications or communications of any kind like that. I would say that if people were interested in ways that the government or the government entities have tried to communicate with the phenomenon, they might want to dig deeper into some of the data that's come out of Skinwalker Ranch.
So you weren't alone in seeing these objects. Do you remember the reaction of the other person on Lookout with you?
Yeah, it was a young gentleman. I can't remember his name, but I turned to him and I said, "Did you see?" I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Did you see that?" And he was looking back at me, mouth open and eyes wide, and he nodded and he said, "Yes, Chief, I did." And that there really wasn't a lot more to say. It was that incredible that we were just kind of like going like that. And I walked into the bridge and went about the rest of my watch. I don't think Kevin was on watch, so I didn't call him at the time. I spoke to him the next morning at breakfast when he told me that we'd received the gun camera footage in the over the SIPRnet the night before.
And have you kept in touch with the lookout person by any chance, or have you contacted you since?
No, he has not identified himself or reached out. I didn't know who it was. It was a watchstander who, at the time, I was the chief master at arms on the ship, and that watchstander would have been someone who had just gotten on board within the last couple of months. It was a very it was a junior watch station, and looking through what's called my cruise book, which is kind of like a yearbook for the ship during that period, I couldn't find the face that I recognize and remember. So it's going to be up to him to go, oh, I was there with him, and I'll know if it was him or not. I remember exactly what he looked like.
During your interview on the CNN earlier this week, you mentioned that objects were displaying characteristics that would put them technologically anywhere from between 100 to 1,000 years ahead of us. Was that statement based upon what you saw with your own eyes, or was it observed on radar and captured on video, or all of the above?
I would have to say all of the above. One of the first things that Luis talked about with me when he interviewed me over the phone a few years ago was about those characteristics in the sky. And it was very helpful to him to hear someone describing some of the 5 observables, even though they didn't know about the 5 observables yet. So it was another triangulation of data, you can say. We had radar data, we had pilot data, we had camera data, and now we had eyeballs on the bridge of the Princeton. Gary Voorhees also witnessed them at one point through the big eyes during a different time. He and I are pretty sure that I was on watch at the same time, but we didn't cross paths when he came up to use the big eyes.
I'm sorry, I think I lost a little bit of connection. Can you just repeat the last sentence?
Sure. I was talking about the fact that Gary Voorhees also witnessed the Tic-Tacs and the lights of the Tic-Tacs in the sky. He had come up to the bridge and he had witnessed them through the big eyes. I was just mentioning that he and I have discussed this too, and we think that that this was while I was on watch, but he and I didn't cross paths when he came up to the bridge.
So I wanted to take a step back from the off-world origin concept for a moment for these objects. Given the statement on the 100 to 1,000 year ahead tech, has that, in your opinion, discounted the possibility of them being a result of foreign adversary technology or experimental U.S. military assets?
Well, I think that we need to make sure that we focus on something specific when we're trying to talk about the subject, because we're talking about generally a 70-year investigation that to me spans a wide spectrum of events. So if someone says, are they this or are they that? My answer is always going to be probably not, and I don't know, because it's such a wide spectrum of things. It would be silly to make a binary choice like that. However, I think what people are asking is, do I think some of the things that we have seen, might they be our enemies or our near-peer adversaries or other groups of humans and with human technology spoofing us? That is possible. That is completely a possibility, and we need to be able to train our military and our first responders to be able to determine the difference between those two things.
The day after you saw the objects, you were able to watch a segment of the now released footage of the UAP. In your opinion, has the most compelling section of footage been held back from public release?
For me, no. I never saw anything that that has been held back from the public. The small file that was squirted over to the Princeton via the SIPRNet was basically exactly the same as the longer one that we all saw that was a little bit over a minute long. It was just scaled down in quality a little bit so it could be emailed. And what they had done also was they had clipped out the phase changes. Each time the craft did something different, they had an equal amount of time of each of those things. So it was kind of a condensed version, but I wouldn't say that anything has been held back.
Also, in your opinion, have you seen the smoking gun evidence not yet seen by the public? This which really tips the scales in your perception that what was buzzing the carrier strike group has no off-world origin, has an off-world origin?
I'd hesitate to say off-world. Just a moment. I'd hesitate to say off-world because we don't know the origin. But no, I'm happy to say probably non-human. Or let me put it this way. When I say non-human, I'm saying this is not a person that has an email address and pays taxes and has a normal life that I think you and I would understand. So While I'm not trying to play it safe or anything like that, the defense intelligence, or the DIRDs, let me say, that came out of ATIP, the research documents, and a lot of people like to write those off because they don't see conclusions that tell them what they want to hear. But what they do give us is a very good picture of what we're seeing. And we don't currently possess anti-gravity technology or stealth capability at that level, or the ability to cancel inertia or travel at hypersonic velocity, et cetera, et cetera.
So then, if you could be a little bit more specific, what do you think that it could be, if you had to put it in words?
Well, we live in a big universe, and I think what Chris Mellon said the other night on CNN was apropos. It would not surprise me the least if another civilization out there found us before we found them. It wouldn't surprise me if the techno signatures that we're so sure we're going to see all across the galaxy, if it's full of other civilizations. We may be wrong. Maybe we're the only ones who use radio or things like that. There's a whole plethora of explanations when we start talking about what we would call aliens. Then you have the idea of a breakaway human civilization, someone that's leapfrogged the rest of us, perhaps a group of technologically based conglomerate of companies or something like that. And then others have thrown about ideas of multidimensionals and even ultra-terrestrials and other species that might inhabit the planet with us that might be more advanced, perhaps out in the ocean that takes up 2/3 of the planet. So I think that covers the whole spectrum in general.
And have you personally considered the interdimensional aspect?
I have. I've spent a lot of time thinking about all of them and trying to find patterns and trying to find things that fit. And that's why you'll hear me so often say that I believe that this, what we call the phenomenon, is a spectrum of different events that we tend to lump under one umbrella.
Let's backtrack a little bit. When you were on the bridge of the Princeton and the Nimitz officers contacted you about the strange contacts, did they relay any specific descriptions or details of what you should be looking out for, seeing as they wanted you to get eyes on the objects?
I was taking most of my direction from Senior Chief Day in the Combat Information Center, but his department head, Lieutenant Commander Teresa Elders, the operations officer, had been in communication with her counterpart on board the USS Nimitz. And they, as was evident in the email chain, that was attached to the video that we all received, you were able to see over the course of the week how they had utilized their education, their acumen, and their skills to try to think about everything this could have been. So they were talking about temperature inversions, they talked about flocks of seagulls, they talked about balloons, they talked about all kinds of different things inside of these emails while a team of people on both ships was trying to figure out what we were looking at.
And when this was happening and when you had read those emails, did you believe those?
Oh, well, certainly. I mean, these were people I worked with every day. This was a battle group that I had done numerous exercises within. I understood the inner workings of the carrier strike group and the squadrons that were attached to it. I was a bridge officer, standing officer, or junior officer of the deck, and conning officer, so I was familiar with how things were communicated back and forth. And by that time, I had also stood what's called an under instruction watch for quite a few hours on a console called SWIC. I don't remember what it's called, but it was down in the Combat Information Center. And what that does is it gives a surface warrior, as we call ourselves in that portion of the Navy, it gives them a much better picture of how the ship fights. We call it fighting the ship. It's how the ship fights itself, how it fights war. And I had never seen anything like this. No one I worked with had ever seen anything like this. A couple of guys were smug, and they were like, yeah, that's some, advanced DARPA project. A lot of guys were saying it was UFOs. A lot of people were saying they knew where the UFOs were from. It's not too much different than it is on UFO Twitter any given day. God love everybody, but you can't line up 10 folks and get the same story about where they're from, what they mean, what they're driving, how they're powered.
Have you an idea of an estimation of how many other witnesses had eyes on the same object that you saw, either on the Princeton or on other vessels in the group?
I never did get around to asking the starboard side watch if they had seen it, and I expected all of my watchstanders to report back to me. So the fact that nobody did, and I'm sure I asked a few times on the mic, I don't recall it, but I would have gotten negative responses, or else I would have remembered. So I don't know who else saw what I saw at that moment besides the port side watchstander. But I do know that Gary Voorhees, Petty Officer Gary Voorhees, had said that he saw the contacts on the same vector that the radar was showing. He had went up and looked, and they were there. Commander Fravor, his wingman pilot, I believe that's Lieutenant Commander Dietrich. As well as those were the only people. I can't remember the pilot who recorded it. Unfortunately, his name always escapes me.
But the people that you did ask and they gave you no response or a negative response, do you think it was because they really didn't see the object, or maybe because they were trying to avoid ridicule?
No, I think they would have said so. We were just looking for contacts. We weren't looking for UFOs or aliens or anything esoteric. We were looking for contacts. Most contacts, if you see them, they're either non-luminous or luminous. So these happen to be luminous. Even an aircraft at distance, depending upon its lighting configuration, can look can be a luminous object. A metal object can take a reflection from the sun and be very luminous. Balloons, silver mylar balloons, are something we're completely accustomed to out in that area of the ocean. Pilots and mariners are completely accustomed to all manner of balloons floating out to sea. So we see those all the time.
Mm-hmm. Exfoa says, I hope I said that right too. Great show. Has Sean ever looked into the military's experiments with remote viewing and their claims of finding various alien bases around the world?
I have. I've read most of the unclassified data that I could find, and frankly, most of the books from the people that served at Army Fort Meade and the Stanford Research Institute and various other peripheral programs. I find a lot of the data very compelling. Like other people, any story by another person, if you can't verify the data yourself, it's just that. But I find the data and frankly the phenomena of remote viewing to be something that's very compelling.
Yeah, it is. And it's amazing how it's been studied for quite some time, and even has their own school for it, and even been funded by the CIA. I think it was in the 70s or the 70s, right? So that's really interesting. It is something that you've practiced?
I've given it a try. I'm a meditator. I was a meditation facilitator / teacher for a little while. So it's something to naturally try. There's interesting things that occur at the boundary between the boundary of consciousness between awake and asleep. And if you are able to maintain your consciousness in that area, there's a lot of interesting things that occur. I don't bet my rent money on it. And I don't change the course of my life based on it, but I find it to be very compelling.
You just, previous to this question, you just mentioned balloons and seagulls. What do you think of the certain skeptic hypotheses that all of these things can be chalked up to be seagulls and balloons?
I don't give it any daytime. I don't give it any of my effort. It's a very facile explanation that it just speaks more of the psychology of the debunker than of the event itself.
Were you made aware at the time that the objects were also being tracked as solid targets on the Princeton's radar?
Yes, one of the first things that Kevin had told me was that I wouldn't believe what they were seeing on the radar, that these things were popping in at suborbital altitude, and then they were immediately dropping down to the deck right above the water in a fraction of a second, almost instantaneously, and then stopping on a dime was what Kevin had said. And we were all incredulous to that. I mean, we were going to find this if it was real, but none of us believed that we were going to find anything. So when we did start finding solid returns, and when the radar techs and Senior Chief Day and other folks were telling us, no, these look solid, and Senior Chief Day asked the captain if we could send out a sortie of F-18s. And
for those, I'm sorry, for those that might not know what F-18s are, can you just briefly explain that?
Sure. I'm not sure which one they were flying, but it's FA-18 stands for fighter attack. It's a fighter attack aircraft. It's a fighter bomber, I believe, and it's the main complement of the United States Navy on board our aircraft carriers for fixed wing aircraft. We launch and recover via catapult and arresting wire, and we have launch capability on a 5-minute notice at any given time.
And during this time in 2004, was that one of the most advanced technologies that you had at the time, or was it?
Absolutely. The radar on board the F-18 Hornet, as well as the Aegis radar on board the USS Princeton that had just been upgraded, were the most advanced radars in the world at the time.
Wow. Was there, to your recollection, was there, to your recollection, a moment when other bridge officers on the Princeton or other vessels in the group made it known that the objects could represent a security threat significant enough to warrant a change of alert level? Or was this something that you heard being debated?
There was no time that we discussed the Tic-Tac or the Tic-Tacs, plural, being a threat. At no point would I say that they were harassing our assets in any way. They seemed to be sharing our operating area and going about their business on their own. I believe Senior Chief Day and Commander Fravor said they inclined toward it seeming to be an aloof technology.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned in your interview with Lua Elizondo in the TV show Unidentified Inside America's UFO Investigation that you had a subsequent meeting and PowerPoint presentation about general items to do with operations, and that the only mention of the UFO was a silly animation. It was just then brushed off as a non-item. Did you leave that meeting thinking that it was done that way to be delegitimized and deter any further mentions of the encounter? Or rather that nobody had a real clue on how to address the topic being so fringe in nature?
Actually, I have an option C because I took a lot of cues from my captain that night. He was a very senior 06 in the Navy. In fact, this was his last tour before retire, or actually he had one more twilight tour perhaps. But he was quite senior and quite respected. And I had been trained in interview and interrogation and other things like that. And I was looking at someone who was completely unconcerned with these events. And when he blew it off and made a little joke about it, I didn't feel it, looking back, there was nothing, I wouldn't call it stigmatizing so much. I mean, I think we all kind of felt the same way. It was nice to let the steam off. If we weren't going to get an answer, it was nice to just kind of blow it off and move on. But the way that he reacted, I thought this must have been an advanced project of ours, or a black project, or DARPA, or something like that.
In your interview with Lua Elizondo in the TV show, you also mentioned that later you put yourself in a mindset of pretending that the whole thing didn't mean anything and didn't really happen. During that time, were you approached by others who witnessed it and felt the same way as you?
I wouldn't phrase it quite that I was pretending. I truly believed it had prosaic explanations and that it wasn't otherworldly technology or whatever until 2017. No one else had ever approached me about that incident. Well, the only person that did, I've discussed them before in some other podcasts. It was 2 weeks after the incident when I returned. I went back to my old police station to steal some caution tape and just talk to the guys. And when I walked in, one of my guys had pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, Chief, can I talk to you? Can we go have a cigarette?" And I thought that was strange. At the time, I smoked and he didn't. And he was very against it. So I kind of squinted and said, "Sure," and went with him. And I was kind of like, "What's all?" And he actually took one and lit it and everything. And I was like, "What's going on here?" And he goes, "Hey, did you guys see anything weird when you guys were out there on the Princeton recently?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, we did. Why?" And he said that, well, he said that his wife had witnessed the Nimitz Master-at-Arms force guarding pilots in their staterooms until folks landed on board in plain clothes. to debrief the pilots. So I still don't know if that's true or not. That's third party. That's one of the first things I reported to Lou. So I don't know if those are the folks that eventually came and took the radar tapes, or who they were, or even if it triangulates accurately. But that was the only other person that ever approached me about the incident.
Wow. High Strangeness Stranger asks, is it possible Tic-Tacs are bulk project tech? Is that what BLK means, bulk?
Black project.
Oh.
Yeah. That's what I thought back then. But looking back and having read the dirds and having talked to Lou for a few years, there's no way that technology was us, and it wasn't China, it wasn't Russia. That's my opinion, but I'm going to stand pretty firm on that. If that turns out to be our tech, I'm going to be one of the first people to go, I was absolutely wrong, and I'm going to have mud on my face.
Moose1911 has a question. He says, how many times are targets picked up but no one can visually verify them? I am curious how often that happens. Keep doing great work, Cristina and Sean. Thank you.
I'd say that happens often. But the thing is that a lot of times I think that you're going to have a person manning, for lack of a better word, a radar scope, and they're going to be seeing something. Now, whether they're going to be able to have an observer in place to look on the same vector and try to see that the two things don't always come together. You might be in inclement weather, or you could have a low cloud cover. If we're talking about a air traffic controller for commercial air, he doesn't have a team of observers. I was lucky enough to at least have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 folks or so that I could call on sound-powered phones and order them to look in a specific direction. That's a very unusual set of circumstances to have that equipment, that person directing it, and a team of people ready to do that. So,
in the ensuing 11 years of active service, even though you tried to mentally put the encounter out of your mind, did you learn anything more about the events or hear of similar events with other vessels? And if so, are you able to share with us some details?
I dove into Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. I dove into the website Above Top Secret. I was a prolific poster for about a year. I was quite the skeptic. Many of the people that I enjoy friendships with today and have quite a bit of respect for, I was quite critical of them at the time. It's been a strange intervening time. I was very much in the period between the Tic-Tac and the 2017 New York Times article and meeting Lou. In between there, I had become an atheist. I stopped believing in anything magical, esoteric, wonderful, wacky, out there, anything, and became a sourpuss, for lack of a better word. That I went through a lot to get away from that later on. After I retired, I had a hard time transitioning. When I took off my uniform and didn't have my anchors on my collar anymore, I lost a lot of my identity and I lost a lot of my confidence. And so I had to do a little bit of personal rebuilding via meditation and self, introspection and even a little bit of cognitive therapy. Nobody should ever be afraid to ask for help and go talk to somebody else. But 2017 was a kick in the gut. I walked in the house and looked at my wife and holding the computer and just was like, holy yes, that stuff back in 2004 was real. And the look on her face, she knew exactly what I meant when I said real. It meant that it wasn't some cool Air Force stuff.
Tim E has a question on a comment that you had mentioned earlier. And he says, what type of energy is emitted from these craft that can cause disability? Is it energy we know and use or no? Is the type of fuel or propulsion known or have a guess?
As far as the type of energy emitted, I believe that I'm not a scientist by trade. I also don't have an education that would make me someone who we should be getting these answers from. But I believe that most of the defense reports that I've seen, or not, I shouldn't say defense reports. I should just say reports in general, because I'm mixing a lot of civilian data with other things. But I do believe that they are radiating sometimes in the gamma range. Which is a very high radiative frequency that you can be exposed to that when you're around nuclear and fissionable materials. It doesn't necessarily indicate what their propulsion system is. It would seem that that's a byproduct of it. We only know a certain list of things that we're able to produce gamma rays with, but it would. Yeah, that would all be speculation beyond that. I have no clue what's in their gas tank, to be honest with you.
What do you think the Tic-Tacs were actually doing based on your military experience? Recon exercises, the object underwater that Fravor saw?
That's an excellent insight. My opinion, based on what was witnessed and what we put together after the fact, it would seem to me that the Tic-Tacs were tender vehicles to something larger in the water, or they were observing something in the water. Now, I know that that area of the water is often described as 747, in the size of a 747. I've never heard it described as the shape of a 747. I think it leads a lot of us to think that it's an elongated shape. I believe that Commander Fravor has described the water was roiling. So my prosaic explanation for that was it was a school of sardines, and that's what the Tic-Tacs were checking out. Because when Lou and I went down to Ensenada, we interviewed pilots and fishermen who talked about spotting those very same groups of sardines for fishermen. You know, the spotter planes would then lead them back out. So is that a possibility? Totally. Could it have been a larger craft that they were tending to? We've got lots of reports over the 7 years that say that smaller tender craft seem to go in company with larger craft. So I think that's the spectrum of possibility there for me.
Brendan has a question, and he says, I just wanted to say I appreciate what you both are doing. Sean, would you agree Rubio, Harry Reid, and others stating the phenomenon could be from an adversarial country is most likely, so the subject continues to gain momentum?
I think that people like Senator Rubio and former Senator Reid make those statements because pardon me for saying it like this, but we live in a real world, and that has rules that the rest of us apply to our daily lives. And for most of us, UFOs aren't in that rule set yet. So I do think it's, number one, they have to come at it from a prosaic, provable standpoint. No one has proven the origin of these. These are unidentified. Occam's razor would say it's another country, that it's humans, etc. Because we still, again, none of us have evidence to bring out for the 7 billion people on this planet to convince them all that these are aliens or these are whatever someone's beliefs are. So I think they go with the most likely explanation according to what we all know.
So kind of like fitting into our ideologies.
Mm-hmm. And that's the best estimate we have. I mean, I know a lot of people have assumptions. They think the government must have this and they must have that, and I heard this and I read that book. I don't know. And I can't stand up here and say that we do or do not have these things. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that the people that inform us, our government, our media, etc., we all know that if they started talking about aliens and flying saucers and couldn't show us one, and have our elected representatives walk up and touch it and see it, none of us are going to believe that either.
This is true. I mean, we're definitely, if you see it, right? If you don't see it, you don't believe it. If you see it, you believe it.
Yeah.
So let's change gears. The experience obviously place seeds within of your curiosity and of a shifting of your paradigm, which in recent years, as more people have come out and talked about the incident, and also with so many So much being released and validated on the topic in general by the government has allowed you to follow a different path in pursuing truth, not only about UFOs, but about the bigger questions of life, consciousness, and alternate living. Can you describe how that process has been for you, like how much your paradigm has shifted?
Wow. I don't think it's just my generation, but I'll speak from, an about to be 50 something Gen Xer. The movie, The Matrix blew my mind. And it took a long time after that to really kind of assimilate the ideas that were in it and to learn where I think it's the Wachowskis, where they went for their inspiration in that story. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm having been in law enforcement and in anti-terrorism investigations, etc. I'm quite aware that a conspiracy is just a couple of folks deciding to pull one over on somebody else. It's not that big of a deal. There's conspiracies all around every day. I have a conspiracy to pick the restaurant for dinner later tonight, with someone else, so we don't go where I don't want to. But at the same time, we've seen so many changes in this subject. We've seen so much openness that it's opened my mind to so many different possibilities. My personal interactions with my own consciousness in meditation, while fasting, and things that might be foreign to a lot of other people have taught me that how I defined myself in years past is quite different than how I intend to define myself going forward. And my duty to the people around me. So I like to think that this is a subject that it really opens people's minds. It can't exist in the same space that our old ways of thinking did. So we're going to have to open our minds to new ways of thinking to wrap our heads around why some folks see this, why some folks don't, why some feel like it's interacting very personally with them, why other people feel like it's interacting with them in a negative fashion. There's a lot of parts of this that none of us like to talk about because they're the yucky parts. And someday we're going to have to get there, and we're going to have to talk about those and talk about the mental health aspects and where that bumps into the phenomenon and where the phenomenon is causing mental health aspects, whether negative or positive. So there's so much to it. And right now we have to focus on the everyday nuts and bolts stuff because that's what's going to keep people's attention. And I think that's about all that we can prove to each other right now.
So you're very much in touch with others who, like yourself, have had unexpected encounters with this phenomenon, both in active service in the past and now obviously outside of armed services. Is this paradigm shift something you have observed and shared with others?
It is. This is about all I talk about. It's about all I do. My family has been really kind to me and supportive. It took a long time for it to be I wouldn't say an easy topic in the house, but one that we just expect every day to hear more and more UFO crap, as we say, since it's our job here in the house. It's obviously that's not how I think about it. It's incredibly important to me because I've dedicated my life to it. But I have seen a huge shift. I have seen an incredible shift just within the last few weeks and even in the last few days. I don't like getting hopes up too much because one of the parts about being a human is realizing that having our expectations dashed is one of the most painful things we can ever experience besides shame. But I dare say we're doing it. I dare say we've moved the mountain, we've changed the conversation, and all of these other things that people are just so excited and so frankly desperate to start talking about with other people. I think we're going to start seeing that dam open and that river start flowing for everybody.
You are now a self-described UAP awareness activist. Can you tell us how you are going about pushing that awareness, how you are involved with the quest for more official transparency in the phenomenon?
Yes. A lot of people who knew me to be daily on Twitter and writing a lot of articles and producing content for YouTube or other things like that have noticed that I'm not out there as much anymore. That's because I've formed a team with a couple of colleagues of mine to help support Lou. We're not completely public yet, but we've been able to assist Luis and Christopher Mellon and a few other people with getting into some really influential spots and getting to talk to some people. And that includes members of the press. We've given briefings for, and I want people to understand, there's nothing about these briefings that are secret or special. You're not getting left out of anything. It's the same kind of thing that everybody on UFO Twitter already knows all about. But we've been able to kind of pull out on the freeway around the stigma because of Luis's gravitas and Chris's background, and really go, hey, let us get 10 minutes of your time. And if at the end of this, you think it's not worthwhile, then that's it. And we've had practically no one turn us down.
Practically. So that means there's like
a well-known, noted debunker and skeptic who is world famous, and that's probably a list of 5 or 6 people, so nobody's going to guess it. But he frankly was like, "Oh hell no, I want nothing to do with you." So,
how do you balance your meditative life and spiritual pursuits with your efforts for UAP awareness activism, or do you feel they are synergistic with each other?
I have found that, frankly, the core values that come with my meditative practice, which are they're just basically really steeped in compassion, forgiveness, and self-awareness. I think they translate perfectly to the subject because it is such an emotional subject. I've never met anyone who had a strong opinion about it that didn't have a strong set of emotions that went with it. A lot of people that seem to have experienced this phenomena have trauma that goes along with it. Admitting to trauma, understanding its effects, and understanding that practically every single one of us has experienced it at some point or another in our life, and that it's helped mold our actions from that point out. Even knowing that is beyond a lot of folks. And that's not to say that they're not sophisticated. It's just to say that they haven't gotten there yet in that self-awareness piece. So for me, a day of UAP awareness activism starts and finishes with meditation, frankly, because I have to know who I am when I begin the day and when I end the day. And I know myself by calming, paying attention to my breath, sometimes using a mantra, but basically dropping into what a lot of meditators call heart space. And it's a very peaceful place where you kind of forget that you're Sean or Cristina for a minute. And you kind of remember that we're each other and that we're everybody. Now, a lot of people are going to call me a hippie for that. And I get it. And but those same folks are going to tell you that they can't sit in a room alone with their own thoughts for 10 minutes because it'll drive them crazy. And I get that too, because I used to be that person. So for me, it really just comes down to compassion, because this is too important of a subject to every single person involved to play with it.
And how long have you been meditating for?
6 years now. 5 years, 6 years. I'm not sure. I don't really keep track like that. But 5 or 6 years.
Wow. And do you think it was a slow progression, or it was pretty quick in seeing the improvements?
I was one of those people who had really fast, I don't want to say results, because meditation should never be results oriented, but we're humans, and we need check blocks or wickets or so I had some pretty awesome experiences in the beginning. I don't like talking about them. I think most, dedicated meditators don't talk too much about what occurs on the interior. It's best that we find out on our own. But it was real hard at first, and then some really awesome stuff happened, and then it got real hard again, and then it's been pretty easy since.
Hi Strangeness Stranger has a question, and he says, if ship-based radar systems can pick these up, have you heard if we can track these through Aegis or THAAD missile defense systems?
Everything that I've seen, and I'm not the authority on this, but everything I've seen has said that there seems to be a pattern with us having flaps, as we say, UFO flaps with the military in regards to radar upgrades. I could be wrong about that, but it looks like that's what happened to us in 2004 with the Tic-Tac. It looks like that's what happened in 2015 with Roosevelt and the F-18s, that were out there. So I hazard that as our technology has reached out more into the electromagnetic spectrum, as our sensor suites sample more and more of the reality around us that we don't see with our regular eyes and senses, it appears to me, in my opinion, I don't know if this is true or not, but it would appear to me that we keep catching up to the phenomena on its edges, and that perhaps it might be adjusting its paradigm to not be detected after that. But that's a lot of speculation on my part rather.
Carl Vibe has a question. He says, does he, I'm assuming you, feel the phenomenon could communicate with meditation and telepathic contact, and has himself anyone he knows reported such contact in his experiences?
That's a question that I've been asked a lot. I've provided my opinion on contact meditation before and told people that I think they should be careful. For me, that has more to do with a person's personal psychological well-being. I don't think everybody should be trying to do that because, frankly, I don't know what it would be like for a non-meditator to try to go through that process, and what it would be like for them to get feedback. Let's just say that, because I don't know the origin of the feedback. But a lot of people seem to assume that what is occurring in consciousness for them is other entities. I'm not going to start naming them. I don't want to ruffle any feathers, but let's say folks think they're talking to other people. Some people think that what they see in the sky sometimes when they're doing that are UFOs and aliens that are talking to them telepathically. Is it possible? Yeah, I totally think it's possible. I think that my personal experience is that we live in a very dynamic universe, that the human psyche and what we call consciousness is a very dynamic and large environment and system that we don't really understand. We're just living in it. So is it possible? Sure. But we still don't have anybody that's got some nice clear video and has a land, look, I've been contacted in the last couple of years by a handful of people who made very clear to me that they could provide evidence, that if I would come to them with my camera and detection equipment, that they were sure, and that they thought I had a good heart and they thought I would be a good person to do this. And I took them at their word. And each time I was BS'd completely. It wasn't just a set of nice folks who had a bad night meditating. We never got down to business. So it's a rough subject for me. I know that there are other people that have hoaxed folks. There's a lot of people out there that make money taking people on UFO tours, and I'm sorry. I've looked up plenty of these folks. They're pointing out satellites. They're pointing out, we know where the Taurid meteor storm is seasonally. We know if you don't know anything about the sky and someone takes you out to the desert, I could probably convince you in one night that we were surrounded by craziness. So I think we have to point out the charlatans. I think we have to look at the peer-reviewed data. I think we, as much as we've been forced in what people call ufology to rely on anecdotal data and data within the community itself, we have to break this out into the daylight and get real peer-reviewed answers. I know that's going to be tough.
Does Sean feel the military has ever used or assets as bait to try and attract these things for studies/data?
I would remove the word military, and as much as I am not fond of calling our government the government or an edifice, I would say yes, I feel that the government in some fashion has done research to try to bait the phenomena.
And one more question here. It says, do you lucid dream, or do you believe meditation gives some answers?
I have to be true to myself. Even though I might turn some folks off. The short answer is yes. The long answer is that I believe that when we meditate, I believe that we're able to tap into something that is beyond us. It's given me a great hope for who we are, and what all of this is around us. But as I'm an artist, I paint, I write, I play quite a few instruments. And when I do those things, I surrender a piece of myself to the same place that I go when I meditate. And the beauty of the art that comes out is completely different, a completely different quality than what I was able to produce when I was trying to force it. If folks are familiar with Charles Bukowski, you'll understand what forcing it means.
Could you briefly describe who that is?
Charles Bukowski was a prolific writer, a poet, but he was also a horrific alcoholic, and he had a horrible view about creativity, in my opinion.
George says, I knew he sang. It's in his voice.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to continue now for my Patreon supporters for Q&A on everything from Skinwalker to exoplanets. So sign up. Thank you to my Patreons.
And now, bonus content of questions and answers previously only available to Patreon Club members.
You mentioned Skinwalker Ranch, so I'm really interested to hear your thoughts and insights on what is going on there and how much you think it might have to do with the objects you observed on the Princeton.
Interesting. I think the direct connection's hard to draw for me, but there have been numerous sightings of what we would call UAP at Skinwalker Ranch over the years, on and off the record in myth and lore, and even in some of the reports that seem to come out of OSAP and Bigelow Aerospace. It's a very interesting property. I like to take I like it when I shouldn't say I like it. I'm very interested when I find a portion of the phenomenon that has a modern day that presents itself in a modern day fashion, that also has a great deal of lore behind it, especially when that is with an indigenous group of people who've maintained an oral tradition. So I find what they have to say very interesting when coupled with the defense reports. Beyond this, it becomes complete speculation. The people we'd want to speak to are people like Colm Kelleher, and other folks that were involved with Bigelow Aerospace at the time. George Knapp is obviously an expert on this subject. But there seems to be a different way that energy manifests itself. There seems to be, in some ways, a different way that time flows. There seems to be, what we call the phenomena, whether we're talking about individuals moving within a realm we don't understand that touches matter within the one that we live in. There's also so much strangeness comes out of that place that if I were to speculate or write a science fiction novel about it, it sounds like there's almost a rotating door of a portal of some kind there that has such a roulette type effect. Either that, there's some people that speculate in a more of a valet type theoretical slant, that what we're seeing is a control system that is perhaps breaking down at that specific location on the Earth, and that we're seeing quantum effects that, while they appear a certain way to us, may not have the meaning that we seek. Kind of a Schrodinger's cat effect. If you're familiar with Schrodinger's cat, the cat's neither alive nor dead until you open the box and find out what the state of the isotope is. So perhaps sometimes when we see through this crack in our reality, it's anybody's guess what we're going to get back.
When those Tic-Tac objects you saw on the Princeton disappeared, did they blink out like they shut off their lights, or do you feel they literally warped out of the atmosphere, or even shifted their frequency into another dimension? What is your opinion?
Well, I think we're all really informed by a lot of the science fiction movies we've seen. So I think we know what we're talking about when we say warped in a classic sense. They just blinked out. When I say blinked, it's the same as if you were to blink your eyes and an object that was there a moment ago is just no longer there. There was no effect to be seen. I can't really speculate on where they went after that. I think where they went, I don't mean to joke, but it was to Commander Fravor's Cap Point. Obviously, it wasn't at the same time. But I think that's... I can't say that they're going anywhere that isn't here. They could be translating from one place to another so fast that we just make an assumption that they're doing that. Again, I think a lot of the speculation comes from, we make assumptions based on what we know from science fiction. We make assumptions based from what we've seen in scientific literature about things like the Alcubierre drive and modern warp drive technology, and we try to apply it to what we've seen based on the defense intelligence reports. And we do get something that I think at some level is going to touch on esoteric physics. So is it going in via another dimension? Is it creating a wormhole? Is it bending space-time? Is it moving along through our reality at a frame rate that we're not able to perceive properly? There's a lot of different possibilities.
You mentioned that you have been invited to witness UFOs and it had been just a waste of your time. But have you ever just gone off on your own, maybe on a road trip to some hotspot to see if you can see these things again? And if so, where?
Yes, I have. I've spent time, we spent time down around Guadalupe Island for the History Channel show. And we had an interesting sighting down there. I've also been out to some specific places out at Joshua Tree, and I've had some interesting sightings out there and some interesting, not your run-of-the-mill meditative experience. Let's just put it that way. Nothing that I could bring back to anybody as definitive proof of anything, but I'm familiar with what the folks are asking about. Yeah.
Well, I'm aware of west of Sedona being a UFO hotspot, and there's a strange ranch called Bradshaw Ranch west of Sedona too, and it's kind of like a mirror of Skinwalker Ranch. It has changed hands many times, and the government has been involved in buyouts, and it has all kind of under the same phenomenon that has been described at Skinwalker Ranch. Have you ever been to Sedona or to do sky watches there?
I've spent a little bit of time in Sedona. It's a place that I enjoy quite a bit. I haven't, believe it or not, though, for all the visits I've had there, I've never done anything more spiritual than go on some tours of some Native American ruins and petroglyphs and things like that. I haven't been back since that was something I was more interested in personally. It's something that I would like to do. I have a lot of plans when I have the time and the resources to do a little bit more personal exploration. I've been asked to give my opinion on so many things in the last couple of years, but as far as having the time to actually really apply myself to some of the more fringe parts of this, because frankly, somebody does have to check them out and report back to the rest of us. I haven't had the time lately. So I look forward to getting back to that a little bit.
You also mentioned earlier that you were asked to bring special detection equipment to those who invited you to UFO sighting events. What equipment do you use for sky watching?
Well, when I say special, I guess I'm saying just something not everybody's going to have in their back pocket like an iPhone, but some FLIR equipment, some different, some infrared, some low light technology stuff. Let's see, tri-field meters, just basically anything that we could bring with us to literally to even include an FM radio and an AM radio to sample the spectrum. We also, when we were going out, we had military grade night vision with GoPros attached. And we had, personnel that were dedicated with lasers to, and I'm very careful when I talk about using lasers with things in the sky. You don't laze things in the sky. I don't care what you think they are. You blind that pilot, you could kill a whole lot of people. Never do that. You may laze in the vicinity, but never at the object itself. And besides, if you don't hurt anybody, the FAA will still come after you. But the short answer is just try to sample the spectrum as much as you can. If you have an internet connection, you should know what satellites are in the sky over you, what regions of the sky are hosting a meteor shower or at the time. You should have Flight Radar 24 or some app like that telling you what aircraft is in the sky. You should know the generalized flight paths of the military aircraft, etc. And you should understand lighting patterns of aircraft. You should be able to call all of that stuff out easily. You should never be fooled. So the moment that you see something weird and you know, your hands are shaking and you're barely holding the camera well, you know that you're seeing something weird. So
what other things are you interested in out of the normal and aside from UFOs in the realm of the paranormal and the supernatural?
Well, I'm obviously most interested in human consciousness. Who we are, how we approach life, how we weather our challenges, how we let feelings occur in our body and how we translate them and then emote them to other people. I'm really fascinated by how we operate and why. Beyond that, indigenous culture, myth, and even historical religion. All of those things, they to me, they just form a beautiful tapestry that's our reality. They'll speak to us a little bit about who we are on a larger level, not just the current society that we're living in, but maybe what we are as a collective. Those things fascinate me. And peeling back the layers of who we are and what our reality is. And expanding ourselves. Those are the things that interest me the most.
Where would you like to see the disclosure process in a year's time? And where do you think it'll be, realistically speaking?
Honestly, I think we're going to get what I want. I think we're going to get a curriculum that's going to exist in the public eye in an unclassified fashion if we keep working. I think that we're going to get governmental oversight in a way that gives the populace confidence in an issue, while also having executive oversight over those programs so that they don't get out of hand, as perhaps things in the past did. I also look forward to a time when academia is going to step up and say, we've seen the data, we understand that there's more work to be done, we're going to take this seriously, and it becomes a curriculum. So I think we're seeing the beginnings of that. So a year from now, I hope that we see the permanency that I truly hope for.
Are there any interesting projects you're working on with Lou Elizondo now to help push this topic forward that you're able to speak of?
I dare say that we have our hands, I don't want to say in a lot of pies right now, but we are reaching out in every way, shape, or fashion to competent, rational thinking individuals who, I don't like using the word influencer, but frankly, that's who these people are. They're people who influence the larger zeitgeist and society. We don't have an agenda. We just want to get them in front of us for a minute and say, hey, this is serious. Here's the data. Here's where it's been reported recently. A lot of folks need to play catch up. Not everybody is a Russell Brand or a Demi Lovato. Not everyone is paying attention to the subject, but a lot of the people that influence us and that are our campfire storytellers for our society, I think once they understand the reality of this, in a lot of ways, we folks like Lou and I get to take our hands off the wheel to an extent, and we can get back to what we're good at doing, which is, helping figure out the military or governmental side of this. If I can add real quick to that, I think what a lot of folks are missing when we talk about the possibility of these things being a threat. And again, you're going to see the only people that are selling a threat narrative are literally selling tickets to nonsense. So Lou and I aren't interested in a threat narrative. We are interested in the fact that there are things in our local neighborhood, and as military men, we don't feel like we can, if these were to be a threat, we don't believe that we're currently able to protect our population from them. So that just means we'd like to have at least the same length of stick that the guy walking down the path towards us has too, if that makes sense. And we want to make sure that we're protected and we understand what's going on. But I think you'll see that with all of these things that have gone on recently that we're hearing about, the things that were released via Jeremy Corbell, some of those videos, etc., they're showing that whatever is occurring, our military is not going off half-cocked and spraying 50 cal rounds at these things and blowing them out of the sky. So I don't think anybody in the military or surrounding it has a lot more patience left for these people who talk about us coming out here with a threat narrative. Man, find me talking about a threat narrative. I dare you.
Thank you so much, Sean, for joining me today on these exclusive Q&A questions for the Patreon supporters.